Does this work? Can you hear me? Great. I'd like to thank the speaker, John Bercow, who's obviously had to go to listen to my local MP, actually. And I'm sorry that I'm replacing Sophie, but I promise I'll do just as well. She's busy with the Deputy Prime Minister. So I think, if you know what I mean. We hope you don't. So the panel has actually been introduced in terms of who they are. I'll just tell you a few more facts about them before we kick off. I think one thing I'd like to say is that I sometimes play fantasy politics, as I call it. I bought the little wooden model of Parliament that they sell in the House of Commons shop, and then we made a piece for Sky News around it, which ended with a scene in which we had a female Prime Minister, a female Leader of the Opposition, and a female Speaker. That's my fantasy politics, but what can I say? I'm delighted that Shirin is able to join us, because in Bangladesh, that is exactly what they've got. So I'm hoping that she will talk to us a little bit about that. In terms of representation, actually slightly behind the UK with 20%, but clearly lots that we can learn. And you are actually the first female speaker that Bangladesh has ever had. In fact, we have 3 countries represented here with female prime ministers: Mona Juul from Norway and Aloun Ndombet-Assamba from Jamaica. In terms of representation, quite different. Jamaica a bit behind, 12.7%. Norway, as we might expect, streaming ahead with 40% without any legislation. So I'm very interested to speak to both of them about that issue. We have some domestic representatives as well. Maria Miller, who, as well as being the Conservative MP for Basingstoke, was also, of course, Culture Secretary and Minister for Women and Equalities between 2012 and 2014. And Baroness Williams, of course, introduced there as once a Labour MP, but best known to us as a Lib Dem peer. I'm going to kick off with a couple of quick questions of my own, and then we will open it up to you. I think we've got till 10:30, is that right? So yeah. Before we do that, I just want to do a quick straw poll of people here. And my question is this: do you know, out of the 141 countries on this list in front of me, where Britain stands in terms of female representation of Parliament? I'll give you 3 possible figures. Okay, let's say, could we be 14th? Could we be 24th? Or could we be 56th? Okay, hands up, who thinks 14? Is that what I said first? Oh, I've given it away. Okay, who thinks it's 24th? Few people, few optimistic people in the room. Who thinks 56th? Of course, you're right. It's not, optimism was the wrong route to take right there. So let me kick off. Maria, you represent the Conservative Party. You obviously had quite a breakthrough in terms of representation in 2010. You've got some decent selections this time, but there are fears that we are not going to move upwards within your party. Do you think more needs to be done?
Yes, I mean, when I was elected... Oh, apologies. Yeah, when I was elected, and along with a number of other people in this room, I was the 344th woman to have ever been elected to the House of Commons. When I became a cabinet minister, I was the 38th woman to ever have held a place in the cabinet. We have got so much more to do, but I do think that the political parties take this issue very seriously indeed. My own party, the Conservative Party, thanks to enormous leadership from Baroness Jenkin, who I think is in the audience here today, have shown women that becoming a member of Parliament is a way that they can contribute enormously to our country. And at the next election, we will have 1/3 of our candidates in target and winnable seats who will be women. And I think that is a testament to making the positive argument for more female participation in politics. But we've got an awful lot more to do and a much longer way to go.
And does that call for all-women shortlist?
Well, I know that that's worked for the Labour Party, and I do think that whatever you adopt has to be within the culture of your party. We have a very decentralised party where, you know, local associations select their candidates And we have to make sure that whatever we do is we're taking people along with us. And I think we've actually been incredibly successful in doing that. But sure, after the next election, we will be looking to make sure that whatever we need to do, we continue to press this forward, because it's not just important for the Conservative Party, it's important for the whole of Parliament to be representative. I was incredibly fortunate to traffic through the Equal Marriage Bill, now the Equal Marriage Act, 2 years ago. And I think it's those sorts of developments in equality that you will do and will do more of if we have a more balanced Parliament here, because equality for women is also equality for other groups as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to pick up on the Liberal Democrats on this. Back in, I can't remember if it was 2000 or 2001, a number of young Liberal Democrat female MPs said they didn't want any sort of legislation within the party, and they famously wore T-shirts that said, "I'm not a token woman." I have to say, the number of Lib Dems, female Lib Dems at the top of the party hasn't been startling. Do you think that was a mistake?
Yes, I mean, we're in the same position as Maria in one respect that she mentioned, and that is, frankly, having most elections made at the local level. And I think one of the things that one has to address is that that is not a way that has advanced women very much at all. Partly because at the local level you often have some big man, as it were, who expects to be the Member of Parliament and is not going out of his way to help some woman to get the position rather than himself. But I think we need to make it wider. I think it isn't just what the parties do about women. I think it's the fact that Parliament itself is in many ways unattractive to women. It's unattractive, particularly in the Commons, because it is so aggressive. It isn't really, but it is in terms of its public appearance. It looks like a football terrace some of the time. And quite a lot of women who were elected for the first time in 2010, and even earlier, in the earlier stages, didn't stay in Parliament. They stayed for one term and then they left. Now that means that it's Parliament as well as the parties that have to make a major move forward. And I think they've got to learn how to actually make Parliament a more lovable place, a place that people are happy to be. They're happy to be in the Lords. Note the fact that in the Lords there's a higher proportion. Well, sorry, there's a higher proportion of women in the Lords than there is in the Commons. That's just a fact. And one of the reasons for that, there's also a much higher proportion of women from ethnic minorities. And I think that's largely because it's a much more agreeable place to be. I make out that one other point. Well, you can have your go when you want to, but I'm just looking at the fact. The other thing I want to say very quickly is that I think we also have to extend the advance of women to new areas, and I think one of the most serious of those areas is the finance side, the City of London. I think, unlike Norway, for example, we have a poor record as a country in terms of the advance of women to the boardrooms and to the higher positions in a great deal of industry, but even more particularly in finance. And I think it's one of the things we're going to have to address.
Okay, thank you very much. We will obviously come to the audience for comments and questions, because I suspect you all have some quite interesting experiences. And one thing I would like to just throw in for everybody as a kind of general thing that I'm interested in is, we're obviously talking about representation in parliaments around the world, but we all know about everyday sexism. We've all seen that kind of phenomenon. I'm quite interested in whether or not people feel that that's something that they come across when working in places like this. Aloun, can I ask you, you've clearly been very, very successful in terms of your political career in Jamaica, but there is this issue about representation. What's your experience been like, and what are you trying to do to change that there?
Thank you. I don't know if I would say I've been successful in my political career. I served one term as a senator, and I served one term as a member of parliament, and then I walked away from it. Because we all want to see more women in parliament. I think it's a position all over the world. But we have to recognize that there are some serious difficulties when you're a woman. First of all, to get elected. Since 1947, when we started to have elections and women got the right to vote, we have had only 67 or 8% of our parliaments being women. The highest number was when I was in parliament, when I was elected, when I became a senator for the first time, that there were 15% women in the parliament, 20% in the cabinet, and 28% in the Senate. We have never seen those figures since then. Although it's not for the want of trying. In our last elections, 30% of the candidates were women, but only 12% of those women won their seats. And there are some problems, and I can speak about it from my point of view. It's much harder for a woman, I don't know whether that would work here in the UK, but in Jamaica, it's much harder for a woman to get financing to run a campaign. I must say my personal position was, I came from the private sector, people knew me, people knew of the work that I had done, and so when I went to them and said, I know you know I did a good job in that position, you know I will do a good job in the House of Representatives, so help me to get there, give me money. The other thing is that women find it hard to ask for money. You have to swallow and then go and ask. In my case, I was very lucky. I was able to collect enough money so that I could then run the local government elections to get my 4 councillors elected. So that's one problem. I was in the cabinet, and I remember going to cabinet meetings on a Monday morning with my colleagues and saying, I really wish I had a wife. And that's because, as a woman, you have to look after your family. They're not going to take the fact that you're an MP when shirts have to be ironed and children have to be taken to school and picked up and all of that. So there are some difficulties that women have to deal with. I could only consider going into politics when my son was out of high school and gone on to college, honestly. I know the young women who are currently in our parliament now have a very hard time juggling the requirements of home and the requirements of being in parliament and the requirements of being available to constituencies. I don't know whether you have to walk, whether you have to see everybody. They expect you at every funeral, they expect you at every baptism, they expect you at every major event in a constituency. And you still have, if you're a cabinet minister, you still have your ministry to run. So there are these challenges. However, it's very important that we have women in the parliament, because the women's approach to legislation is different. There's an approach that have us look at legislation in a holistic manner. And so it's very important for us to have more women in the parliament. But until we are able, and I really take my hat off to those countries where they're able to put structures in place to support women, to allow them to do this. My prime minister is a woman. She's been in the parliament for a long time. She only was able to get married when she was close to being prime minister, because your relationship suffered. I had no relationship while I was a parliamentarian, because your partner has to be very strong or very retiring. Either he's present or he's very absent. And it puts a strain on your relationship. Your children have to be willing to put up with hearing people say all kinds of things about their mother.
Worse for a woman than a man?
I think so. I think so. I know, for example, my son just couldn't deal with hearing. And lots of the things that are said are not true. They know better. So it is a problem. I mean, women in Jamaica have done much, much better in business. And they're leaders in business. And you probably have seen an ILO study that says that if you live in Jamaica, chances are your woman is a boss. And it is true. We are leading in the other sectors or Chief Justice is a woman, or Director of Public Prosecutions is a woman. The Ombudsman is a woman. Most of our parliamentary, most of our permanent secretaries are women. Most of the people in our diplomatic service are women. But in Parliament, there just is that difficulty.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to come to Norway in a minute because it's a nirvana to us. So we'll ask you a little bit more about it. But before I do, it's quite interesting to hear all those cultural references really there, many of which I recognise here in the UK as well. Shirin, how difficult was it for you to get to where you were in Bangladesh? And do you feel that that's something that holds women back there as well?
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased and delighted to be here this morning. A very good morning to all of you. Yes, Bangladesh has made significant strides in women empowerment, and particularly in political empowerment of women. And I think, first of all, I would like to just highlight a few very fundamental things which has actually helped to, facilitate this process of women coming forward in politics. Our Honorable Prime Minister is a woman, and this is her third term as the Prime Minister, and the former leader of the opposition was also a woman who was Prime Minister. So we have had women Prime Ministers from 1990 onwards, alternatively. So that is a big advantage for women to come forward in politics, because the political will is so important. But the Constitution of Bangladesh, which is a written constitution, actually has a provision since the time of its adoption in 1972 that there will be quota and reserve seats for women in Parliament. Initially, the number was much less, but at present it has been increased over the years, and now we have 50 reserve seats for women in Parliament. But the beauty of the Constitution is that it also allows a woman to come through the direct election or electoral process. So that process is also open for every woman who wants to contest election directly. So through the direct electoral process, we have in the present Parliament 21 members who have come through direct election by competing in the constituency with other candidates, and 50 in the reserve seats. So altogether we have about 71 women member, and in a parliament of 350 altogether, it's about a little over 20%. But this is, we notice an increasing trend in terms of the number. So I think it is very important that this initial provision was inserted in the Constitution, because in many countries, including a democracy like India, they are still struggling to put a provision like this to facilitate women coming in through the reserve seats. I know that there are a lot of discussions and debates about the very fact whether we should have reserve seats or not, question of equality, but I think it is more of affirmative discrimination, because it is very important to have the critical mass in the Parliament. So if just, having a few women as token will not serve the purpose. But if we really want to have the critical mass, then this reserve seat is not a permanent solution, but it can be a temporary measure as a stepping stone to facilitate the process. Because I say this because we have seen women who have been in the reserve seats have been able to come through the direct electoral process the next term, because it helps them work in the arena to become more familiar, to nurture their constituencies and things like that. But there are, of course, very critical challenges, and I'm sure that it is quite common across the board, and it's no different for Bangladesh. As a woman, you have to face all the difficulties, because firstly, coming through direct electoral process will require you to be given a nomination by your political party as a candidate. And we don't see political parties giving so many women nominations, because for a political party, I think it is very important how many seats they're going to win. And if that is the calculation, then they really judge you not how far you will actually be able to win through the direct election process. If you can't, then you are not you're not considered, and so that is a big obstacle. And of course, the resource constraint, as my distinguished panelists mentioned, is always there. The financial problem for women to mobilize, to overcome that, the perception problems. But I think in Bangladesh, in the socio-economic context, we have been able to deal with the perception issue, because people are receptive and they are accepting, voting, electing women prime ministers. So that is a very positive indicator. And also in the local government, we have very good women representation, and it has also been put in place through a piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to throw one last question to Mona before we open it up. There's been some really interesting issues raised here. You're clearly making great strides in terms of representation in Norway without any legislation. I mentioned this to a colleague this morning, and as someone who's got a bit of a personal interest in this particular issue, I'm pregnant, I've got a small child, I'm about to face quite a busy election period. We wondered if it was much more to do with the structures that are in place in a country to support women to be flexible in the workplace, particularly once they've had children. But I'm just interested in what you think really works for you in Norway.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me. I think also that the key to women's participation in all spheres of society starts with increasing women participation in the labor market. That also help advancing women's participation also for sure as MPs and in all other spheres. On top of this, which is based on sort of equal rights and I mean based on human rights and equal opportunities for women and men, it is also economically very smart to have as many women as possible included in the workforce. And I will tell you this, that in Norway, women's participation in the labor market was increased from barely 50% at the beginning of the 1970s to over 75% today. This is more than 15% more than the average in the OECD countries. And if Norwegian women's labor participation would be at the same level as the OECD average, the value of this production loss would be equivalent to the entire Norwegian oil wealth, including the resources still left on the ground. This has been the point of both our previous, and he was a man, Prime Minister, and also now our now Prime Minister, because it makes a sound economic policy as well. As I said, the employment rate in Norway is 68.5, and for women is then now 66.4%, which is one of the highest in the world. You're right. We have not have any sort of quotas in order to promote women in Norwegian society in general, except that in 2003 we introduced a law of quotas in public limited companies, which means that, and this law obligates companies to have at least 40% women on the boards of those companies. But what we have done then, not and asking more directly your question, a crucial tool in what we think has been a very successful model in advancing women's rights and equality is what we call the Norwegian welfare state. This is a policy that, as I said, consecutive governments, no matter where they are coming from politically, has had as its main aim to make it easier for parents to combine caring for children and work. So what we have done then is several things. One of them is to have a relatively cheap childcare. We have a government support to kindergartens economically to keep a maximum price on kindergartens. We have also, which makes then every family, I mean, can afford to have the children in kindergartens. This means that more women will go to work. And today we have actually 90% of Norwegian children between 1 and 5 years attended kindergarten. And a few years ago, the Parliament also passed a law stating that all children has the right to go to kindergarten. Another important arrangement is the obligation for schools to provide after-school activities, which means that women can stay, hopefully not too long at work, but at least not having to pick up their kids at, or women and men for that matter, having to pick up their kids at 2 or 3 o'clock, but 5, 6. And finally, another very important tool is that we have quite generous parental leave. Parents are now entitled to have 49 weeks fully paid parental leave, and 10 of them has to be used by the fathers.
Yes. 10 of the weeks, not 10 days.
I think I stopped there.
Thank you very much. That's fascinating. It is a Nirvana. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to open this up. I'd like to try and keep this as punchy and responsive as possible, so I'll ask both the audience members and the panellists to keep our responses brief so that we can just keep moving on. Let us know who you are. There's already one at the back. Is that Baroness Jenkins? It is. And there's a microphone there.
Thank you. I'm Anne Jenkins. I co-founded Women to Win with Theresa May 10 years ago. And I think, as Maria said, we made significant improvement in the Conservative Party because we've traditionally not been very good. My own grandmother was the only Conservative woman MP after the war. So we went from 17 to 49. But I just want to make, and I'm confident that we will have an increase. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I might not have been so confident, but next time I think we will. There's a problem with the pipeline. In our case, we have 30% coming forward to get on the list, 30% of the people coming forward, and all the way through. So I think we'll have 30% of candidates, and I think 30% of the new MPs will be women. So it's about attracting them, as many people have said, and keeping them in the game. And so it's about nurturing the next generation and showing them it's not such a terrible career. And as we were told the experience from, I think it was Jamaica, about money, we, Women to Win, we've been building up a, pretty good war chest to distribute to any constituency that takes a woman. So I'm hoping that will encourage more constituencies next time round as well. But it isn't just our sector, as Shirley said. It's it's across the board, this as an issue. So I don't think we should beat ourselves up too much. But as people say, and I'm sorry, it's my last point. Why does it matter? And indeed, men still say, oh, women are not much good at it. But it matters because women's life experiences are different from men. They're not inferior or superior, but they are different. And that's the difference that has to be better reflected at Westminster.
And Baroness Jenkins, can I just ask you a quick question? Yeah. A few people mentioned that things put women off coming into places like Parliament. Have you found that through your own work?
Well, we try and make it as easy. By the way, I should also declare an interest because I am married to an MP, so I see both sides of it. And I was very much thinking about the guest from Jamaica, and she's pointing out all the domestic issues. I think we've got to have just more role models who are coping and doing well, and that's happening across the board. But I mean, one of the things, and indeed, is Seema still here?
She's not, actually.
Okay, because she and I were on a panel about how to be an MP at the WOW session last week. I was very struck by the number of women who put their hands up to say they were interested in being an MP. But, I mean, about 40 of the audience, but only about 5 of them knew which party they wanted to stand for. So that's another issue going forward. No, I mean, I think the point about making Parliament a more, I don't know how Shirley put it, lovable place to be is very important. But, and that is something that Parliament needs to look at far more than they do at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a couple more and then we'll bring in, is that Anne at the back?
Okay, it's Anne Begg. I'm the MP for Aberdeen South, and actually it's to pick up the point about the supply side. I was Vice Chair of something called the Speakers' Conference in the last Parliament, looking into parliamentary representation, and obviously we need to address the supply side and getting enough women coming through the pipeline in order for them to eventually find themselves, whether it's on an all-women shortlist or it's on the A-list if they're Conservative. But there is an issue around how this place is perceived, but something new has entered the political arena, and that's social media. And women are treated appallingly on social media, and women politicians are treated even more appallingly on social media. There's a limit how often you can be called scum before it starts to sink in.
Have you experienced that a lot yourself?
Oh yes, we all do, and it's become part of what it is to be a politician. Maybe even worse because I'm a Scottish Labour politician, and it's particularly brutal in Scotland at the moment. But I think it's happening across the country, and that can only get worse. And I don't know what the solution to it is, because a lot of the people who are putting out the abuse are faceless, nameless, misogynist very often, although male politicians do get it as well. And the falsehood is around the country before you've even got your counter-argument. And I've just discovered this morning, where I was on the programme where someone has tweeted something where they've misinterpreted what I said, but that's already been retweeted before I can say to this person, no, actually, that's not what I said. So there are issues around social media, but I don't know how to address it. But I think I'm finding that women, and young women particularly, are being put off politics because they see what's happening to those of us who are in politics.
Has anyone on the panel had a negative experience with social media?
I haven't had personal experience myself, but I can say this, and it's been so public. Our Minister of Youth and Culture is a former Miss World, a beautiful young woman, a very bright young woman. There have been so many social media stories about her. She went on the beach, she had on a bikini, and she had on a t-shirt over it. It made the news. Arguments. But it didn't stop there. I mean, there are people who said, but she was not properly dressed. She should not have had on the t-shirt. And, you know, she's had to deal with that just recently. There's comments about what she wears, about, you know, it just really is terrible. And as the last speaker said, some of it is made by faceless people. But she has to, unfortunately, spend so much of her time trying to deal with these negatives, which none of those things have to do with the quality of her work. It just has to do with the other things. And so that is really, really a problem.
And if you just pass to Maria, clearly you have experience with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dame Anne Begg is absolutely right to say that I don't think there will be a woman sitting in Parliament that hasn't suffered at the hands of social media. I've had sexual abuse threats, I've had 2 death threats, I've had 2 investigations by the police. These are not things you want to talk about, particularly because it does put other people off. But I would say that we are not alone in that, and I think the issue around social media is not just for women in politics, it's women more broadly. And I don't think we should let this distract from the most important thing here, which is modernising the working place in this environment, which I think is one of the most pressing things for the next Parliament.
Can I just add one other thing? Parliamentarians are not paid at the same level as if you're in the private sector. And I think when you talk about the pipeline, when you talk about how many women would like to do this, the fact is many women cannot afford to do it because you work so hard, and at the end of the day, I mean, when I went into Parliament, I took a serious cut in salary by going into Parliament. And then you have to be very careful about money and expenses and all of those things. So, you know, if you have to balance your family and the needs of your family and whether you can afford it or not, that is a serious concern. Okay. But I suppose it's a concern for men also.
Do you want to comment? Are you on Twitter?
No, I'm not.
Good move.
Yes, I think the financial support becomes an issue, and sometimes women, even in pursuing different professions, maybe a lawyer who has a very good earning, but once they sort of choose to come into the electoral process and become a parliamentarian, of course there will be a decrease in the income level, and that has to be adjusted. So that is there. But also the other things that, you know, once you are in the parliament, firstly you have to come through a process of struggle, that all the obstacles and hurdles that are on the way to, you know, reach there, and once you reach there, how far can you actually make a, you know, contribute in that process, in that environment. Sometimes you may not have the kind of support from your male colleagues, because you know, it's very interesting that every male colleague says, yes, yes, of course we want more women representation in parliament, but not my seat. So then these are the issues that, you know, one needs to tackle. But I think women are facing these challenges very bravely, and they are making it up to the, you know, the goal. As a woman speaker, when I first became the speaker, I think I had a double burden on my shoulder. One was, of course, the responsibility and, you know, managing the house and how well I'm being able to do it, because it was the first time for me. But again, maybe a man in my place, there's always a first time for everyone. I mean, but for a man it would not be so serious, because I always had to think that if I could not perform, then the entire blame would be on women, and the women are not being able to perform. So if women are put in these important constitutional positions, maybe they can't deliver. So that was a very serious concern that I had when I came in, and in every time that I was doing my job, that was always back of my mind, that, you know, I have to uphold this and be able to deliver properly, because it's not only me, but with me it is a reflection to all of the other women also. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I will just come back to a question, but before I do that, just Shirley, you nodded as well earlier on in the discussion about the idea, not just in social media, but that women get treated differently. Is that your experience?
It's my experience, and I think that on the social media, this may be a very controversial thing to say, I do not understand why anonymity is accepted. I think if you're going to make a horrible remark about somebody else, you have to take responsibility for it. And we never allow, for example, newspapers to print letters without the name and address of the person who wrote it. I don't know why we take a different view in social media, and I think it could kill off the ambitions of women. I want to say two more things very quickly. One, I'm worried by the discussion about finances, because I deeply believe there should be very strict limits on the amount of money you can spend in elections. Otherwise, we're going to drive women out. I've seen this happening in the United States, where they have now removed almost all the limits on the amount you can spend on elections, and we've got to stand up against that. And the final point I want to make is that as women who believe in democracy and in the right of people to be heard, we've got to listen to two things from Norway. One is that men should share in family responsibilities. We shouldn't accept the idea that it's entirely a woman's responsibility, because we'll never get anywhere if we do. And the other point about Norway, a very important point to make about Norway, is that young men in Norway are brought up to believe in sharing the domestic responsibility, not just giving way and saying, well, that's always been women's responsibility, nothing will change. It has to change, especially at the level of parental responsibility, both for the elderly and for the very young. And I don't want us to let that pass as if we accept the idea of the traditional distinction between the responsibilities of the two genders.
Cheers. Before we go to the question, I want to get Mona to come back on that, but I just want to make a point actually on the anonymity thing, which is I've worked at The Observer and The Times, and I was a columnist. I wrote columns on both, and on one of them they allow you to comment anonymously, The Observer. On the other one, The Times, they don't. They make you put your full name, and I have to say the tone and the kind of quality of the debate that was triggered as a result of those articles was so much higher. Unfortunately, it was also smaller, the number of people who would respond. But when I left the Observer, I did actually write them a note, and I said, basically, if you're not thick-skinned, you're not going to be a columnist. And I don't think that being thick-skinned should necessarily be something that you have to be an MP or to be a journalist. So I very much support you all on that one. Mona, on the points that Shirley just...
I think the Baroness spoke more eloquently about Norway than I'm able to do, so but I'll just come back to my basic point in the beginning. I think it all comes back to the fact that we need to have arrangements to make women being able to participate, as I said, in all spheres of life, and then also there will be more female MPs if you come either from a workplace, or you have, I mean, different kinds of experience where you have experienced things like bullying on social media. I mean, then coming into Parliament and work on legislation in order to change that. I mean, you are already sort of part of society in a different way than sort of I was about to say going straight into Parliament. Then also, of course, when you are an MP, you have exactly the same kind of challenges when it comes to working hours, to the need to have a proper leave when you have children and all this. So I think we shouldn't distinguish that much the challenge of increasing female MPs and increasing sort of female participation in society in general.
So I think we all agree that having more women makes a difference to the debate that we have here in Parliament. We heard from Baroness Jenkin and Dame Anne Begg, both parties with very different approaches. Just out of interest, how many people here support some sort of positive discrimination to get more women through the door? And how many are against it? Oh, not that many. In fact, I didn't see many Conservatives put their hand up. Yeah, please do.
In the selection so far, we've Conservative Party voluntarily and through merit had 10 all-women finals and only 4 all-male finals. So it's kind of happening without the compulsory element.
You don't need it.
Well,
hopefully. Okay, let's take a few more. So, lady here, and then these both here. Oh.
Hi, my name is Lucy Wake. I work for Amnesty International. One of the things that I think would be really important, we've talked about how there's supply chain issues, there's problems when you get into Parliament. Another issue is actually the work of any future government. And one of the things that, obviously coming from Amnesty, scrutiny and accountability, I think are really important. So I wonder what panels think about the possibility of having a Women Equality Select Committee that scrutinises the government's work on this. And I think it also might have an additional benefit, which is one of the frustrations from looking outside in, is that actually women in the UK Parliament, and this year's International Women's Day was very different. Actually, it felt very collegiate in the House when they were having the discussions, but often women from the different parties are often fighting over which party has a better record, when actually those are the women themselves who have all been part of CWO or Fabian Women or Women Liberal Democrats to actually fight to get more women inside.
Thank you. I'll take both of you. Oh, we will. Oh, sorry. Sorry, go on. Oh, yeah, sorry, you do. Okay.
She's still an election person.
I'm obviously, yes, just pass it there. I'm obviously quite interested in when you both, I think, disagreed with Shirley about the Lords as well.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, I wanted to pick up on Shirley's idea. I mean, some of the tweets that I'm putting up with at the moment, you know, they're ageist, they're sexist, etc., etc. And I have a Swiss parliamentarian friend who I meet twice a year in the Inter-Parliamentary Union Human Rights Committee. And she has recently had death threats, rape threats, I mean, absolutely appalling, simply because she's looking into the Swiss banks. So she asked if there were, you know, people here have had other similar experiences. So I think, you know, getting rid of that anonymity is a very important suggestion. And I'd like to follow it up, or if you haven't followed it up yourself, I certainly would like to follow it up. When I was, for my second election, which is a long time ago now,
Women, of course, are either too fat, too thin, too something. They're never just right. And there was a lot of sort of description of, I was fighting another woman who was blonde, so it was the Battle of the Blondes, newspaper headings, Battle of the Petticoats. And when you think of, you know, would you ever have a headline, Battle of the Baldies? There were two bald men fighting one another. But I've been here 31 years now. I came here by the regular route. There weren't all women shortlists at that time. But I don't think I would have been joined by any other women from Wales if it had not been for the all-women shortlists. And that's why I support them, because in some parts of the country, like Wales, North of England, Scotland, to get more women's representation, I'm afraid you just have to back all women shortlists.
I wanted to say a little bit about financing, because I think it's really important. If I was wanting to stand now in a constituency, I would think much more than I did last time. I did it last time to demonstrate that women from the North East could get there. And there were 3 of us elected in 1987, and there hadn't been anybody since Ellen Wilkinson before that. And but now I look after, if you like, 2 or 3 candidates, and 2 of them given up their jobs. 1 has sold her house, and they are absolutely without any finance. And 1 of them gets incredible abuse on Twitter and so on. And she's a really strong, confident, tremendous young woman, but she said to me privately a couple of weeks ago, if I'd known it was going to be this bad, I would never have done it. And, you know, and she, as I say, she's now got no money because she gave her job up a couple of years ago and is expected to be out on the doorstep day in, day out. And, you know, that is now what they have to do. And therefore, they've got to have money behind them to actually do it. And when you go to some Commonwealth countries and discuss with women groups there, and I do quite a bit of that with the CPA, many of them say we have to spend our first term paying back the money that we owe from the election. And, you know, that'll have been expended in all sorts of ways that we don't always want to hear about. But it is a real issue for them. And for many women, and this is where I'm not so, you know, I want to see countries where women are directly elected rather than in special seats. Because again, in too many countries where they're in special seats, they're seen as second-class MPs, and that's not good. But in order to fight a constituency, it has now become very expensive, and it's very different from when I did it 30 years ago. And I just think we need to take account of that.
Thank you very much. Sue Garden. I'm a Liberal Democrat here in the Lords, but I speak as a coalition government minister on women inequalities and education and various other things. We're expected to be multitasking and multi-talented when we sit on the front bench in the Lords. I just wanted to pick up some of the points that Shirley had made about women in the Lords. Although I think there's only about 22-23%, we do actually have a Lord Speaker who's a woman, the leader of the House is a woman, the leader of the opposition is a woman, and any day you'll look along the front bench and there will be as many women as men on the front bench in the Lords. And part of the feature of that is that it's an appointed house, which many of us regret. You know, in a democracy, we would much rather there was an election. But of course, with appointments, you can manage diversity and equality in a way which you can't necessarily do with elections. And one key feature of that, I think, is that for us to be there, other people have shown confidence in us. And one of the features of which stops young women still very often is a lack of self-confidence or a different level of confidence from that which their male counterparts have. And I just wonder if any of the panel have ideas on how we instill. I go into schools to talk about what the House of Lords does, but I always, try and get them to bring up with ideas. And I'm quite struck by how often the very bright girls, particularly in mixed schools, are quite reluctant to show ambition in front of their counterparts in a way which the young men don't. And any ideas about, well, particularly with Norway's fine record, about how we instill more self-confidence in young women?
Okay, thank you. Loads of interesting things there that I'm going to throw bits of to different panel members. Shirin, are the 50 women in special seats considered second-class members of Parliament?
As I said, that there is a lot of debate on the issue of whether there should be reserved seats or not, and whether it should be open for electoral process. Well, in terms of taking part in all the parliamentary proceeding, there is no discrimination between an MP from the reserve seat and an MP coming through direct election. I mean, they can take part and participate in all the parliamentary procedures and process on equal terms. But the way they sort of face a lot of discrimination is that they don't have a demarcated constituency. So when they try to work in throughout the country in other constituencies, then they face a lot of difficulty and hostility from the elected member of parliament who is actually from that particular constituency, because that member of parliament, be it a man or a woman, they don't want to allow another MP to come in and work in their constituency, because it creates a lot of competition. It raises suspicion that maybe the next time this person is going to get elected from here directly. So it poses a kind of threat, and so that is an issue. And the women MPs in the reserve seats often say that, what are they going to work with? So it is more of an issue-based work that they are engaged, like maybe trying to prevent violence against women or bringing down the number of early marriage. They get involved in these issue-based work, which is also extremely beneficial. But the point that I would like to make in favor of affirmative discrimination is that it is not a system that we want to have on a permanent basis, but for us to be able to create an equal level playing field for women so that they can also come in numbers, through the normal electoral process. If we can, sensitize the political parties, like what are the things that they are looking for when they are giving nomination? Are they considering women candidates? If not, why they are not considering? And that why needs to be addressed. That if you feel that this women candidate, I'm not going to nominate from my political party because of X, Y, Z reason, then we need to go into there and try and see how we can change the X, Y, Z reason and allow the women to have an equal level playing field. Because at the end of the day, of course, we advocate that we want to come through the direct electoral process. But till then, and if it takes years and years and years, then we can't wait that long, and something else needs to be done. So in that way, I think I support the process of affirmative discrimination till we reach the point where we can actually make it equal for all. Thank you.
Okay, and when we go back to questions, it'd be interesting to know if people from the Labour Party think that there will be an end to women shortlists. Mona, the question there at the end.
Yeah. Again, I think the thing about sort of empowering women and girls, which of course is the key to have sort of equal opportunities and equal rights with women and men. I think, like you said, the educational system is very much a key there, and it's very interesting in Norway now. I think there are more women studying at universities than men, and the number of women completing PhD is more than doubled since 2006, and last year, for the first time ever, it was more women than men that completed that got a PhD in Norway, which is a quite interesting thing in order also to get women into the kind of positions that they of course should be, but also having the confidence to sort of to go all the way. Of course, I think, and what you all been saying here, that even if I said initially that we should not make a distinction between the sphere of politics and other spheres of society, of course, politics is a little different because it's sort of more scrutinized. The media is much more sort of after politicians than in some other spheres of society, but I think that this is probably more challenging and more difficult for women. But again, I think it's a more sort of general problem than it is sort of a female or a women's problem. I think I also should mention that another thing that we have in Norway, it's not sort of by law, but it is what we call positive preferential treatment. That is that allows employers to discriminate on the basis of promoting equality. An employer can therefore employ a lesser qualified candidate on the basis that the employee is from an underrepresented group. And that is, so it's not only gender there, but it's also age and nationality. So that is the kind of, but it's not sort of, I mean, it's not a sort of a law-based kind of thing, but it is a little of a quota light in a sense that you could sort of use those. And I think that also has sort of helped bringing women into positions. And when it comes to list to parliament, I mean, we have this 40% now, and that of course has become politically impossible for any party to have less. So there is always, I mean, they will always be striving for having at least 40% of women on the list, and also in the government. Now, since Gro Harlem Brundtland in the early 1980s had sort of a 50-50 ministers in the cabinet, that has sort of every government since then has strived to achieve that, and have more or less made it. So of course it is it's not only by law, but it's the kind of having the kind of push for women to go for it in a way that you mentioned.
Thank you. We're getting quite short on. I'll come to you all. I'm just going to get three very quick answers on bits for a moment, just so we can get the questions, and then we can get another round in. Shirley, scrutiny. Should we have a select committee looking at these issues?
I think it's a good idea, yes, and I think the idea that there should be some women on it. Instead, I do want to stress the fact that we need to have on it not women necessarily in a privileged position, but women who have to live the life of not having much money and all the rest of it. And we have to be quite frank about this. There's a very strong element of dynastic raising of women. I mean, it wasn't surprising that Mrs. Gandhi was the first Prime Minister of India, given her father. And I think we have to therefore be quite honest about this and look also at the lives of women without those privileges and those advantages. And I think it's been a good thing to have people on there. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
I just wanted to make a comment about the issue of confidence. The Jamaican experience, and speaking from my own party, is that women are very involved in the party structure. They're involved at every level. They run constituencies, they organize meetings, they support candidates, but they just won't run for elections. So if you go into, for example, the National Executive Council of my party, more than 50% of the people in there are women. If you go into any constituency organization, the executive of those constituencies, most of them are women. In our party structures, we have different committees. I myself was the chairman of 2 committees, and most of my members were women. So women are in fact serving in the political process, but not as member of parliament for all of the reasons that we've spoken about.
That's interesting. And Maria, you've obviously been working with Baroness Jenkins. A couple of things. The point that was raised about, I mean, I don't think people in this country have much sympathy with MPs who complain about salaries, but the point that was raised about the cost cost of being a candidate was interesting. And is there a brutal truth that in parts of the country people say, we're not going to win if we've got a female candidate, or perhaps even more so, we're not going to win if we've got an ethnic minority candidate?
I certainly don't recognise the idea that having a female candidate would be a handicap. I think it's quite the opposite. I think having a female candidate is an absolute advantage. When I was selected in Basingstoke, I know being a woman was an advantage. I think that is something that's quite widespread. Others may have had different experiences. I mean, just drawing on some of the other comments that have been made about any idea that there's a lack of qualified women. I think we have a huge number of women who would make excellent parliamentarians. I just think they're making the decision not to come in, maybe for financial reasons, but I actually think it's more than that. They're not understanding why coming into Parliament will be a good thing for them. There are other ways they can contribute back to society. They can go and be a non-executive director on a charity. They can go and run a charity. They can run a social enterprise. We've got to make the case why to come to Parliament so that we can get a better representation here. I have to say, when I was asked to run for Parliament, I said people like me don't go into Parliament. You know, born in a council house, went to a comprehensive school. I didn't have a privileged upbringing, and I don't think I saw it as something for me, and that's only 10 years ago.
You don't regret it despite some of the difficult moments?
I certainly don't regret it. I think this is the best job in the country for somebody who wants to come in and try and make a difference, particularly as a woman, particularly as somebody who, as I did, worked in business for 20 years beforehand. There are not enough women coming forward. We do need to encourage more, but we need to understand it's as much about this place as anything else.
So we've just got a few minutes, so what I'm going to try and do is take whoever's left on the floor, and then I might, can we go to 35? Yeah? Okay, lady here, and then there's two hands at the back. If you're a man, you're very welcome to participate as well.
Hello, I just wanted to make the general point, which nobody else has touched on except the Norwegian ambassador, about childcare. Because I think childcare in the UK is very, very expensive. The quality is extremely variable. And working in Parliament, I'm not a parliamentarian, you know, very irregular hours, which is very difficult to fit with childcare that's available here. In Norway, a situation I know very well because my brother lives there, you know, yes, there's fantastic childcare, but society pays for it. Taxes are very, very high in Norway. And I wonder whether in the UK, society would be willing to pay the price for affordable and flexible childcare. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The two at the back.
Hi. Yeah, I was just interested to get the views of the panel of what actually needs to happen to increase female representation in Parliament and make it an issue for everyone in Parliament rather than an issue for women in Parliament. I mean, it's great to see a good number of men in this room, but it's slightly disappointing there aren't any men in the panel in a way. I'm concerned it still seems like a niche issue, so I'd be really keen to kind of particularly pick up the examples of what happened in Norway to make this change. It's really inspiring, but I think we've got quite a long way to go here.
Thank you very much. And is there someone next to you as well?
Thank you. What are the key changes that need to happen within Parliament, both at a practical level and at a political level, to really make this place more attractive to women?
Great, thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to? Okay, just lady at the back and then lady here.
Hi, I'm Heather from VSO. We're running a campaign to try and increase women's ability to participate in decisions at all levels, so local and national. I wanted to ask a bit more about the relationship between women at local level in politics, and if the speakers think there's a relationship where we can encourage more women who are councillors to go on to become MPs.
Okay, thank you very much. And here at the front. Just put your hand up later. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Paula Mandela, and I'm a member of the House of Lords. I just want to make 2 points and want to pick up from what both you have said, Anushka and Maria said. I think that, well, I did some work for the Labour government in 2010 about increasing particularly minority women's participation and to meet the challenges of the stereotypes which existed that minority women were not interested or in political participation. And we really smashed it. We went around the country and thousands of women came and expressed their interest. We have to be very honest, really, in our discussion. It's not just women's reluctance, it's political parties who are preventing women coming in. So I can give you lists of women who from 2010 at least, if not before, who've been wanting to come into Parliament. But I think it was Her Excellency who said that men, or Dr. Chaudhury who said that men, anyone but my seat. I think it's a real issue. So I think we need to really be open and honest about it. And the other point I want to make is that it is still truth. It is the truth, and we also have to acknowledge there are women who are being told that if they're from the minority community, that they're endangering so-called safe seats. So I think that those are very, very valid points that we need to be very honest in our discourse.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, I'm going to ask for some very super quick responses. Mona, on the Norway question, the other thing I wanted to ask you was, I know so many people who struggle to get 4-day weeks, 3-day weeks from their employers. I read an article saying it's just taken for granted in Norway. Is that true as well? Is what the lady asked?
Yes, it is possible to work less and to have a kind of flexibility in your work in Norway. But as we see it, it is a little of a problem that it is mainly women that have that or take that kind of advantage to the system, that you can do that, which means that sometimes then they will fall a little behind when it comes to making the kind of career, also when it comes to pay, obviously. So we see it. We think that men should do a little more part-time than. It's not perfect in Norway. No, it's not perfect. So yeah. I mean, the question when it comes to whether you will bear the kind of tax percentage that we have, I think I will leave up to politicians in this country. But the description is very correct. Of course, I mean it doesn't come for free. I mean we pay for it, but it is, as I said, is across the board agreement that this is how we would like to arrange what we call sort of our welfare state.
And to be fair to the parties here, all have been taking action in this area.
Yeah. And just a quick comment at the end, and as concern the panel, I even if I'm very proud to be on the panel as the first ever female ambassador in London, I would think that even my predecessors, that were all men, would have been able to say exactly the same as I have been saying, because what I have been stating is sort of how we have sort of met the challenge of promoting women's participation and equal opportunities between sexes.
So I'm going to have to ask you all to be very quick. Shirley, what more can be done? What practical steps?
Right, very quickly. Number one, I think the point made by the Norwegian ambassador about childcare is absolutely crucial. I would add to that I think we should have a much greater expectation that men and women share responsibility both for children and for not least elderly relatives, which is going to be a big, big factor in the coming 20 years. And the third thing I want to say, I think, is we've got this really serious issue of the social media becoming the enemy of the rise of women, and I think it's extremely serious, and I agree completely with Glenys Kinnock that I think we've got to at least insist that anonymity goes.
Okay, thank you very much. Shirin, on that last point, you've only got 21 female MPs who've come through the normal system. How are you going to drive those numbers up?
I would like to distinguish between two sets of facts that we have discussed. One is whether women are interested or whether they are being, attracted into this profession or taking up political careers and coming into Parliament. That is a separate issue. If they are not, then how we can, make them grow this interest. But the other side of the coin is that there are women, competent women, and they are ready to deliver. And as my colleague, distinguished panelist here mentioned, that in Jamaica, there are women in the political structure. Similar is in Bangladesh, within the political parties, within the executive committees. There are women, and political women activists are all over the place and making significant contribution on upholding issues, working for different causes, promoting the party agenda, everything. So I think it's not a lack or dearth of the number of qualified qualified or competent women. They are there, but it is the process which needs to facilitate their coming into this. And I think one way of going about it would be to strengthen the legal framework, because it is very important. For instance, the electoral law in Bangladesh has made it compulsory that every political party has to give at least 33% nomination to women over a span of 20 years. So there is a catch-22. Yes, 33%, but over a span of 20 years. So that's quite a long term. But still we welcome that, because it has sort of made some kind of compulsion to give nomination to women. So I think it is important to have these kinds of provisions in place wherever needed, because we can't wait forever, and we can't be waiting for the whims and caprices and the decisions and desires of when women can come in and how many women can come in. So I think it is time to address and put it within the legal framework to facilitate the process, because women are ready to deliver, and women who are already into the political process and in parliaments, and even, you know, as prime ministers and holding the constitutional positions, are actually doing a magnificent job in delivering. Thank you.
Aloun, Maria, 30 seconds each. No pressure.
Recently in Jamaica, Senator Duncan Price has raised a motion to have gender quotas in Parliament, and therefore that has put the issue squarely on the table for discussion in Jamaica. I think this is a beginning to recognize the need and to get the whole Jamaican community talking about it, and therefore I think giving more women the confidence to come forward at that level. As I say, it's not for lacking in confidence in other areas at all. We have more women graduating from university. We have more women in managerial positions, in every other sphere of life. So we've put it on the table. It is being discussed, but there are some structural impediments that we've been hearing here today as to what is causing it not to happen. That's my pick.
I think there's been very important issues raised around childcare, social media, and many other things. But actually, I think if we're going to tackle not only the role of women in Parliament, but also the real problem we have in this country at the moment of the standing of Parliament altogether, then we have to really, I think, bite the bullet and admit this place is in a time warp. And it's a time warp we have to get out of. We have to show that it's a relevant organisation, and to be relevant, we have to be more representative. At the moment, 40% of the women who we have here have no children, and I think that that says it all. The lady from Liberty who raised the issue of the Select Committee, I thoroughly endorse, and have to say, when I was Minister for Women, I was astonished there was no select committee to scrutinise the work of government, but also the work of Parliament, and also the work of organisations outside of Parliament. It's a recommendation that's been put forward by the all-party parliamentary group now on women in Parliament, and I am hopeful that with the help of others here we can make that a reality after the next election.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our excellent panel for their contributions, but also everyone in the audience. That was really, really interesting. Thank you.